to all of you joining us from different parts of the world. My name is Kuldeep Singh Chauhan, and I serve as the Asia Regional Director at Free the Slaves. Free the Slaves works across Asia to combat modern slavery by empowering vulnerable communities, supporting research and advocacy, and fostering collaboration among governments, NGOs, and civil society. We work worldwide, but in Asia, in countries such as Nepal, India, Bangladesh, the Philippines, Vietnam, and beyond, we focus on issues like human trafficking, child exploitation, forced labor, delivering education, legal aid, and promoting strong policy action to protect those at risk. Voices and delivers frontline programs that address both immediate needs and root causes of the exploitation. It's my privilege and honor today to welcome you all to our webinar, Life as Child Domestic Workers in Kathmandu, the research presentation. On behalf of Free the Slaves and our partner CWISH Nepal, I sincerely thank you for taking time to be part of this important conversation. Today's session is rooted in a very pressing issue that often remains invisible: child domestic work. Behind closed doors, many children across South Asia and globally work long hours in households, often isolated, undervalued, and unprotected. While child domestic workers may contribute significantly to the survival of their families and the functioning of households, too often they do so at the cost of their education, health, dignity, and childhood. This webinar today focuses particularly on Kathmandu, Nepal, where new research conducted by Free the Slaves and CWISH has documented the lived realities of these children. Our goal today is not just to highlight the data and findings, but to humanize the experiences of these children, understand the systemic barriers they face, and start discussing promising ways to promote protection, dignity, and equality. So this 90-minute session of today is structured into 4 parts. We'll begin with the research presentation, which will take us through the methodology, major findings, and implications of the study. We will then invite reflections from our discussants who will provide insights from practice, advocacy, and lived experience. Afterwards, we'll have time for an interactive Q&A session with you, the participants. And finally, we'll close with some thoughts on collective next steps for research and programming around child domestic workers. We are fortunate today to be joined by an exceptional panel, Ms. Ranjana Sharma, an independent researcher whose expertise and deep engagement with children's issues make her the lead presenter of this report, and Dr. Mata Fullan, Senior Program Manager for Research at Free the Slaves, who will reflect on the findings in the wider South Asian and international context. Over the course of this session, I encourage every one of you to think about 3 guiding questions. What do we now understand differently about the lives of child domestic workers after hearing this research? Second, what strategies or practices could make a tangible difference in helping protect these children? And what role can each of us, whether as researchers, practitioners, advocates, or allies, play in ensuring dignity and freedom for these children? Please feel free to use the chat box to share your comments and questions during the presentations. We will compile those and address as many as possible during our Q&A session, me and my colleague Jaime. With that, let me again welcome you all and thank our presenting partners, Free the Slaves and CWISH Nepal, for their tireless commitment to bringing hidden stories into the spotlight. Now, without further delay, it is my pleasure to hand over to our first presenter, Ranjana Sharma, who will walk us through the findings of the research report, Life as Child Domestic Workers in Kathmandu. Over to you, Ms. Sharma.
Welcome everybody once again. Let me just start up with one of the small lived experience that was shared to me during this research. She was 7 years old and she was playing with her sister one day at home. And all of a sudden, she heard her mother got an accident. So she was rushed to the urban city, Kathmandu, because she was living in a village. And her father and mother both were in Kathmandu area and they were taken care by their grandmother. There were like 4 5 months she couldn't see her parents, but after 4 5 months her father came to the village and said like, come, I'll take you to meet your mother in the Kathmandu. She's in hospital. So she was very happy, first time traveling to the Kathmandu, an urban city she had never seen. Excited, she came with her father to Kathmandu, and her father brought her to one of the house and said like, tonight you stay here and tomorrow we are going to meet your mother. Next day, she waited for her father, but he never came. Another day, she waited, he never came. But only after 1 month, he came and he said, like, this is your new home now. Then only she came to know, like, she is there as a child domestic worker. She have to do all the household chores and everything that the house owners asked them to do. She had no other choice. She cried, she wanted to go back to her mother. She cried to her father, say like, let me take me back to my home or in our village. I want to stay there. I don't want to stay here. But her father said like, no, you have to stay here because this is your new home now. You will get education here, you will get everything here, so you can't go back to home. And when she was giving the story, she was already 16 years old. And she said, like, this is my new home. I don't want to go back to my village home. I don't recognize my father and mother also. I don't love them anymore because they never gave me that love. That is how a life of a child domestic worker in Kathmandu. And in this research, we were trying to explore the trajectories, drivers, and experiences of child domestic workers working in like urban cities of the uh, Nepal. And this is a story of only one child. Like there are so many stories, so different stories. Every children have their own story to tell, and we collected all those lived experiences in this research. Introducing to the child domestic work, this is not a new phenomena. We almost have heard this for a very long time. And in Nepal also, that's a similar case because earlier it was agriculture bondages, date bondages, and there's so many children working as a domestic child worker, but the forms may have changed now recently. So according to the most recent estimate released by the ILO, while we were doing this research, 17.2 million children worldwide are in domestic work. And the reasons why these children enter into the domestic sector include the family poverty, lack of education, ethnic-based marginalization, domestic violences, displacement and migration, loss of one or both parents, and date bondages. And there are countless numerous other factors and reasons that are pushing these children and pulling these children into this sector to work as a domestic child worker. So many children, child domestic workers are worldwide encouraged or even forced to work by their parents or by other family members, because just now I have shared one of the lived experience by one child that she have shared with us during this research. And while others are recruited by intermediaries through different manipulative technique, like you will get a better education, you will have a better food to eat there, or you will have a better room to sleep there, you will have lots of friends there. So those kind of manipulative techniques are there to the children as well as to the parents, like they will get some money also, they will have a good education also. So those kind of manipulation techniques are there. And the experience of these child domestic workers are very diverse. Like it's from very positive, some are very nice positive experiences and empowering experiences because some are really loved by their owners, but very few of them, let me just mention, we are not going for the quantitative number here, but very few of them have a positive and empowering experiences, while most of them have exploitative and abusive experiences, whether they recognize it as an exploitation or abuse, or they just think it as a regular, okay, that's a normalized thing for them, it's a regular life for them. So these kind of very diverse experiences these children have in the domestic household work. Our research main objective was, firstly, the child domestic work in Nepal in urban areas have received a very limited attention in recent years because a shift of this research or the findings or work that are done to them have been shifting from different in other sectors like other visible forms like bricklaying, child labor in agriculture, adult entertainment sector. So these are the shifting areas, because as an social worker or as a researcher also, we always try to look for the new areas of where we can do the research. But the child domestic worker, as CWISH as an organization who have been working for the child domestic worker for last 30 years, we can still say like there are still different forms of child domestic workers in the urban cities. And now it's also been like extended into other urban cities like Pokhara, Biratnagar, and not only in Kathmandu, because it's a matter of pride for it used to be a matter of pride for the owners to keep the child, but now the shift have been in a different form of like we are giving them a support, or it's kind of support from of inform they think like the child domestic worker they are keeping, but this is in more invisible area. That's why people are kind of, it's out of sight and out of mind. So that was the main research objective. So we wanted to shed the light on the current reality of child domestic worker in Nepal, to collect the evidence that can inform the development and implementation of effective intervention that can be aimed at protecting the children in the child domestic sector. So our main research objective questions were: document the path whereby children enter the domestic sector in Nepal, and discuss those social, economical, and cultural drivers that push and pull Nepali children into the domestic sector, and how they intersect with and reinforce each other, and unveil the experiences of child domestic workers, whether it's positive, empowering, or whether it's negative, exploitative, and abusive for them. So those were the main three objectives that we kept in mind while doing the research. And the methodology we used, where we interviewed the 20 children who are currently employed or were recently employed as domestic workers in Kathmandu. And 2-day full participatory workshops were done with the 10 children currently employed as domestic child workers. And we approached one of the school where most of the children studying there are child domestic workers. So we approached that school, and we did the 2 full-day participatory workshop with them to understand, to collect their lived experiences of how they, what they are facing within the domestic, as a child domestic worker at the school, with their friends, or at the house owners. And also we did a half-day focus group discussion with 5 employers of child domestic workers, though we initially had planned to do with the 10 of the employers, but it was so difficult to contact with the owners, employers of the child domestic workers, because they were kind of very unapproachable, and even if we try to talk to them, they say like, no, we don't have any child domestic worker, they are our niece or nephew. Those kind of excuses were there, but we really pushed it hard, and took me 1.5 months to get that time to bring 5 of them together and make them talk about what is what are their thoughts, what are their thinking about keeping a child domestic workers, though they themselves said like they are very good and all that. I'm sure Martha will be sharing all those in learnings. So that half-day focused group discussion with the 5 of the employers was also quite data for us. And also we took an interview of 10 experts from the NGO workers, school teachers, and principal government officials, to understand what are their understanding at the current situation of the child domestic workers, what are the policies that covers or secure them, and what are not there that can be implemented or that can be brought into the light through this research. Here is one of the few picture of the participatory workshop that we did with the 10 of the children from one school who were working as a child domestic worker. And in the participatory process, we asked them to do different activities like the river of life, diamond ranking, Chatpati diagram. And this one is one of the picture of the diamond ranking, where different all the children put all of their like what are the major concerns for them as a child domestic workers, and they have to together rank what are the number one area that they want to be focused, or we can go for solution, so that That's how we did the participatory workshop. And second, this picture is also from the same workers. And you can also see, as I mentioned before, one of these school teacher was there. He coordinated. He was a principal and he coordinated with us because he was also concerned very much with the situation of the child domestic workers in his school, because most of the children there studying were domestic worker, and supported us during the workshop. And he was questioning those children who participated with us during the research process. And now I'll hand over to Martha to share some of the major findings from this research. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ranjana, for guiding us through the objectives and the methodology. And as you said, I will now share with you some of the findings that our research brought to light. So first, we found that children that are recruited in Nepal to work as domestic workers are very young. Their age at which they enter the sector goes from 5 years old to 13 years old. And here it is also interesting to note the discrepancy between what the children themselves were telling us and what the employers told us, because the employers told us that they don't hire anyone who is younger than 13 years old. But again, this is not what the children were sharing, and key informant interviewees such as school principals, government officials, or NGO workers gave an account that is very much similar to the children's own stories. Secondly, children who work in Kathmandu as domestic workers come from villages that are located in the rural areas of Nepal, often remote areas. And they enter the domestic sector through the encouragement, if not even the coercion, coming from parents, aunts, uncles, older siblings, or grandparents. When it comes to older siblings, it's especially interesting to note that these dynamics whereby a sibling would bring a younger brother or a younger sister to work in Kathmandu is especially evident when the older brother or sister is already working in the capital city, may have established a network there, and may be able to find a work opportunity for a younger sibling back home. When it comes to how the recruitment process is set up, in some cases, it's the family members that initiate the recruitment process because they are looking for opportunities in the city for their children to work. And the reason why they do this will be, we will see them in a moment. In other cases, the family members are contacted by the employers or by intermediaries who are working for the employers on their behalf with an offer of employment for their children. And they end up accepting that. However, beyond the family circle, employers and intermediaries are also key actors. Employers, in particular, were found to mobilize their own network to recruit children who may be brought to Kathmandu and work in their houses. And by their own network, we are talking here about relatives, about friends, about people who are already working in their house, about acquaintances from their own village of origin if they are not originally from Kathmandu. So they have an entire network that they mobilize in the moment in which they're looking for a child to bring in their house as a domestic worker. However, and this is something very interesting that our research was interested in finding out, because we didn't found it as something that was discussed in previous research on the topic, is the role that children themselves may be playing throughout the recruitment process. Because too often we look at as children, especially in child labor situation, as not having any agency on the process that sees them becoming child workers. So we wanted to understand a bit better these dynamics and the children's role in them. And what we found, in fact, is that children, in many cases, do play an active part in the process, either because they are looking for the job themselves, and again, the reasons, we are exploring them in a moment, or because they accept an employment opportunity that comes their way. However, as we reflect on the agency of the children, it's also extremely important to keep in mind that this decision by the child of becoming a child domestic worker, of moving to Kathmandu to work in some family's house, is not taken in a vacuum. And the children do not fully understand the significance and the implications of this decision. And again, when I say that it's not taken in a vacuum, I mean that it's a decision that is oftentimes forced by circumstances that are beyond the child's control. Now, let's look at those in a bit more detail. We have push and pull factors that create and contribute to create a situation whereby children become child domestic workers. And these include the lack of sufficient education in the villages, either because there is no school and the school that is closest to the village is quite far or hard to reach because there isn't a public transportation system and the roads may not be viable all the time due to the weather conditions. Poverty at the family level, of course, is another major push factor. Alcoholism in the family, domestic violence, and often these two go together. The loss of one parent or even both parents, and that leads to a situation in which the child is put into the care of someone else, who may be a faraway relative, someone who doesn't prioritize the well-being of the child. Multiple marriage of the parents, and also sociocultural norms whereby domestic work is seen as a way for girls to learn future domestic duties. And this element of sociocultural norms also emerged to some extent in the conversations that we had with the employers, as the employers told us that they have a preference for hiring child domestic girls because they look at them as being somewhat more naturally inclined to engage in those kind of household chores. Now, what happens when this process of recruitment has taken place and the child finds herself or himself in Kathmandu in the house of the employers? So after moving to the employer's house, children are enrolled in public school. And we have emphasized here public school because it's worth pointing out that the children of the employers are exclusively enrolled in private schools, while child domestic workers are enrolled in public schools. And in any case, this enrollment in the school is the most significant improvement that has taken place in the life of child domestic workers in Nepal over the past years. However, we also need to understand the nuances of this reality, because the truth is that often children are late for school because in the morning they have to carry out a series of domestic chores in the house, like preparing the breakfast, cleaning the dishes, cleaning the utensils used in the temple for the prayers, bringing to school the children of the employers, and they cannot go to school until all these tasks on the list have been completed. Also, there are occasions in which child domestic workers may have to skip class, again, because they need to engage in work, or they need to leave early school. For instance, we talked with a child domestic worker who told us that she almost always has to skip the last class of the day because she needs to go to pick up the employer's children in another school. Also, child domestic workers are not given enough time to study. As soon as the school day is over, they cannot hang out with friends, they cannot stay in for some other extracurricular activities, but they need to go back home very quickly to continue engaging in the works that they started in the morning. And we will see in a few moments what this work entail. So once they get back home from school, they have to work very intensively and they cannot get to study or to do homework until all this work has been completed, which means that for the vast majority of children that we spoke with, it is only late at night that they finally have some time for themselves that they can dedicate to study. And also, it is worth pointing out that child domestic workers are not provided by the employers with decent school supplies, like materials, clothes for going to school. And this is one of the elements that children were emphasizing in the conversation with us during the workshop, during the diamond ranking that Ranjanaji was telling us before. Also, to understand better what is the experience of child domestic workers in the school when they are late or when they arrive at school without having completed their homework, teachers unfortunately do not always try to understand the situation that the child is finding himself or herself, and do not always offer these children a space to talk about their situations. And this is very important because it contributes to creating a reality of isolation and loneliness for these children. Not only in the house, they live this reality when the employers don't show care for them, but also in the school. There isn't an adult figure that they can rely on and that they can share their reality with. Of course, it's important here not to make generalizations. As Ranjana was telling us before, we have been able throughout this research to cooperate with a number of school teachers and school principals that were very supportive of our research, that wanted this research to be carried out and helped us in any way possible, connecting with the children, offering safe spaces within their school in which we could have the interviews, have the workshops. But still, there are some teachers that are not sharing that attitude and that do not have the same kind of interest in helping the children, those that are child domestic workers and struggle more at school. On this point of isolation and loneliness, it also came out a lot in our research that child domestic workers typically do not have close friendships. I said before that as soon as the day of school is over, children who are domestic workers need to walk back home very quickly. So they do not have the opportunity to hang out with friends after school, and even in general throughout the day, even after they've completed their task in the house during the weekends. It is very rare that the employers would give them the free time to hang out with friends. Also, they cannot bring friends back in the house for a number of different reasons that the employers were telling us, and they cannot visit the the friend's house. When we were talking about this specific issue with employers, some of the justifications that they were presenting for why they don't want their child domestic workers to interact with friends is that they want to protect them. They feel very responsible for these children's well-being, and they are afraid that they may end up becoming friends with bad influencing people that may put themselves in trouble. So for them, what they say is that the obligation of coming back home is a way of protecting the children, which of course is not how the children feel about it. They feel very isolated and sad about not being in the position of cultivating friendships. Also, the isolation is made even worse by the fact that when a child leaves the home village and moves to Kathmandu, the contact that they can have with their families of origin becomes very sporadic. Both the contact on the phone, because most children cannot freely make a call back home. They have to ask the permission from the employer. And in most cases, the employer would want to be present throughout the call. So as a way of controlling the information that the child is sharing with the parents back home. Also, when it comes to the in-person visits, most children can only visit their parents once a year during the major holiday season. But it was also not uncommon throughout this research to find some children that have been for even more than 1 year without seeing their family. And the reason is that during the holiday season, there may be even more work that needs to be done in the house, perhaps because the employers are inviting family and friends over, and there is more food that needs to be cooked. The house needs to be even more clean than it usually is, so more work for the child. Or in some other cases that we were reported, during the holiday season, the employers would leave Nepal, they would travel abroad, and they don't want the house to remain unattended, so they want the child to stay back in the house and act as a 24/7 guard, basically. Here is another picture from one of the workshop activities that we were doing, in which the children were sharing their thoughts on issues that are a priority concern in their day-to-day life. And we see Ranjanaji facilitating this workshop activity. Now, moving on with some other findings of relevance. In the house of the employers, as we were saying before, the days of child domestic workers are very long because they start to work early in the morning. They have to work right after school, and the work can extend well into the night. And they are intense because there's a very long list of things that they need to be doing. They may be needing to babysitting, buying groceries, preparing and serving the food for the family, for friends and family visiting, cleaning the dishes, washing the clothes, cleaning the house. And cleaning the house, it may not only be the apartment where the family is living, but in the case of, depending on what is the situation of the family, it may be more than that. So one child was telling us that he needs to clean the entire building because the employers that he works for are the owners of the entire building. They rent up some apartments, but the child is responsible for cleaning the garden outside and all the floors. Also, some children engage in tasks that are hazardous and are not appropriate to their age. For instance, they need to carry heavy weights. For instance, the water balloon or the gas cylinders, and they also need to carry them from the place where they buy them back to the house and up the stairs. Also, another element that we couldn't find in any pre-existing research, and that for this reason we were very interesting to explore, is the extent to which child domestic workers may also be forced to work outside of the house, because we often think of child domestic work, for understandable reasons, as a type of work that takes place behind the doors, inside the walls of the house, and that's certainly what it is. But there may be instances in which child domestic workers are also forced by the employers to work in the employer's business. And in fact, this is what we found in the case of quite a number of children that we spoke with. So there were some children telling us that in the afternoon they need to work not only in the apartment of the employer, but also in the business of the employers. For instance, in a clothes shop, a liquor store, a hardware store, a carpet store. They may need to carry the merchandise when it is brought to the store. They may need to attend customers, bring the lunch, food and drinks to the employer working there. They may need to look after the shop when the employer is not present, and so on. So this gives us a picture on how long and tiring are the days of child domestic workers, and also a picture into the extent to which their work extends beyond the house. Also, we found that some children, a minority to be fair, but still an interesting finding, is that some children work during the night in party palaces, that are places connected to the entertainment business, because they want to make some pocket money. And this leads us to the next finding, is that the majority of children don't receive any payment for the work that they do. At best, they are given some money when they go back home once a year during the holidays to bring to their parents. And again, the narrative that the employers shared with us is interesting to reflect on, because when we asked them about the payment issue, they were telling us, why should we pay them? Because we already give quite a lot to these children. We enroll them in school, we provide them with food, we provide them with clothes. So they truly feel that payment is not something that should even be talked about. It's not a fair point that we are asking them, because they already give a lot to these children. Also, most children told us that they don't receive any money from the employer for their daily needs. For instance, buying some food, or buying some school supply, like some color pens, anything. They don't get any pocket money, and they are afraid of asking the employers, because they already know that they will be answered negatively, and they have like a relationship with the employer that is based on fear. When it comes to the conditions of life inside the house, most children have access to proper food and proper sleeping arrangements, which is a very positive thing, while a much worse situation emerged when discussing about healthcare, because children told us that they are not brought to the doctors or to the hospital when they are sick. And some children even told us that when they are sick, it's not only that they don't receive care, but they also have to work as usual, as if they were feeling well. And this, again, is in a clear contrast with the situation of the children of the employers, because as soon as a child of the employer is feeling unwell, he or she would be brought to the doctor. So when employers were telling us that they treat child domestic workers as if they were their own children, then when we talked with the children, that was certainly not the picture that emerged. Reflecting on the negative relation with employers, I was mentioning before that this relationship is often based on fear. And this is connected to the employer's attitude toward the children. Like, oftentimes they scold the children, they verbally abuse them. And in the case of some children, we were also reported instances of threats and beatings. But here I want to emphasize the fact that verbal abuse was spoken to us by the children as something very hurtful. So for some children, the fact that the employers would systematically abuse them verbally, address them in a disrespectful way, is something that deeply hurts them and that leaves an emotional and psychological scar on these children. It affects the way in which they look at themselves, the way in which they perceive their value as people. And finally, feelings of sadness, homesickness, and loneliness, again connecting to some of the points that we made before, are certainly very common feelings among child domestic workers. And before, with Ranjana, we move to the recommendations of our research. We are presenting here a picture from a river of life. This was one of the exercises that we did throughout the workshops. And this is one of the drawings done by one of the children. It's very nice because you can see that on the top left of the drawing, there is the village that the child comes from, which is presented in a very positive and colorful way. There is a small house, there are flowers, trees, mountains, a beautifully shining sun. There is a river rich in fish and flowers and small boats. And then you have this kind of bridge or wall that separates that all the life of the child with the new life of the child, which is the life in Kathmandu, where you see the big building where the child is working, the employer's house. The beautiful flowers and the tree have been replaced by some scattered grass. And in the river, you see stones that are representing, from what the child was then sharing with us, some of the challenges that as child domestic worker she experienced on a day-to-day life. And of course, this is only one example. Every child was sharing their river of life with us, drawing and taking the time to explain us. But this is just to give you a representation of some of the activities that we did throughout the workshops. And I will now invite Ranjana to start off with some of the recommendations.
Thank you, Martha, once again. Education infrastructure as well as the resources in Nepal. So most of the reasons that the children have said, like they came to Kathmandu because their parents thought like they are going to get a very good education in Kathmandu while working also and getting being taken care of by somebody else, and education will be good, while that is not the case. As we just heard, like they are mostly enrolled in the public schools. Even I'm not saying like public schools are bad, but because they hardly get a time to study and all that. So that is one reason we are recommending to Nepalese government, like invest more resource in education area in rural areas, like education sector. If that is made, the infrastructure is made available, the teachers, the quality of education is made better, then they don't have that excuse of getting migrated to the urban city for the better education until they finish their basic school levels there. So that is one of the recommendation that we are giving. And another one is creating more and better job opportunities in rural areas, because that is also one of the case, like migration is being done, there is no work, and even the parents, they have to go sometimes to the Middle East or even in India. So there is separation of the parents, and that all create a difficult life situation for children to make a choice. And then they were sent by their one of their parents or both of their parents, saying like he or she will be safe in the urban area studying. So if the government can create a better job opportunities in rural areas, do the better economic development in those sector, getting the better market opportunities there, then that will be really one of the way to we can stop the child domestic worker coming to the rural areas. Another one is government have to ratify the ILO Convention 18189 on domestic child workers, and have to introduce the regulations on decent work in the domestic sector, because that offer protections to the children employed therein. Otherwise, like, there are many legal frameworks which talk about the child protection, but not specifically about the child domestic workers, because it's been invisible in the government eyes or in the public eyes. So that will be one of the recommendation that we are giving to the government. And another one is the train ward level government officials on how to recognize, monitor, and address instances of like child domestic labor within their wards. Because in Nepal also, what we can see, I can give one of the experience that we had during this research was in one of the ward of the Kathmandu, we approached them to talk to the child domestic workers, and they even agreed to talk to the employers and bring them together at one platform. But when they were, even the government have written the letters to every household to come and talk, they say like, no, we don't have any child domestic workers, they are all our nieces and nephews, so why should we go? And they simply ignored that letter. That was quite interesting to see like how even the government approaches are being neglected. So we want Nepalese government to train the ward level government officials so that they can say like clearly distinguish between these are the like child domestic workers, and these are really somebody's nephew or nieces. Yeah, so in next slide, we'll go for the recommendation with the employers of the child domestic workers who are quite reluctant, and most of them are those with whom we talked were the housewives, but their husbands are quite working in a well-to-do places, and they can easily afford the adult domestic workers, but they kind of choose to have a child domestic workers because they don't have to pay anything, or it can be very much easily manipulated. And also the thought process of these employers are like we are supporting these children and their family, so that's why we are keeping. So we also want to recommend them like have a better life and work condition to the children working in their house. And if you say like if they are really my child, then take care of them as your own child, and not just as an excuse to give us sympathy and say like we care but we don't care kind of situation. So better life and work conditions, so for that advocacy and awareness is really required. And advocate with the peers for better condition for child domestic workers, because many of them say like I don't have any child domestic worker in my household, but I have seen my relatives having it, and or my other like neighbors are having it. So in such condition, they also have to come forward and advocate on their rights and well-being. So we also want to recommend them. And in another slide, we are going to talk about the parents of the child domestic workers, and they have to collect more information about the reality awaiting children in Kathmandu, because often when we ask during the research process whether their parents knew like what it is going to be, then the children have mentioned like they didn't knew. Some of them have said like they knew they have to go and work in Kathmandu, but they will be well taken care of. But even the parents didn't knew like what is going to come up for their children in the near future. And work means like 24 hours work, and so those kind of situation, or education means like only going and coming back to school is not education. So those kind of thing information have to be passed on to these child domestic workers parents, and that kind of liaison have to be done by the schools or by the teachers or by the organized social workers like us. And also they have to monitor the situation of the children in Kathmandu, because often they tend to forget like they have somebody working in Kathmandu, or they have a children in Kathmandu, because meeting them once in a while during a festival time, or just for a couple of days and visiting them or seeing them in a very normal, it's very like normal for them to see like, oh, they're happy, they're having a good room and having a good food to eat. But apart than that, there are so many physical, emotional and mental health conditions that they are not aware of. So those parents should be aware of such kind of situations. So those are the recommendations that we are giving to the parents. Now Martha will continue further.
And then there are the recommendations that we developed for the teachers of child domestic workers. So we are inviting them, as I said before, to make an effort to understand the situation of child domestic workers. So to understand that children that are coming to school without having done homework, without having studied, what is the reason behind it? In which situation are they living in the house? And they need to make the effort to understand it, because otherwise they're making the life of these children even worse, more lonely, and they are affecting their psychological and emotional well-being negatively. On the same page of this recommendation, it should be able to offer a safe space for children to talk about the reality. These children, because they're very isolated inside the house, they have a quite bad relationship with employers. As we said before, they're not free to call their parents back home. They only visit home in the best of the circumstances once a year. So they don't have any trusted adult in their life. And teachers here become very important figures in the life of these children, and they have to embrace the responsibility that comes with it and be able to offer a safe space for children. Because as we said before, we cannot generalize, and there are some teachers that are already working in this direction, as the teachers and the school principals that collaborated with us on this research. They should be the ones encouraging other teachers to collaborate with children's rights organization as a peer-to-peer training. And also they should teach to their students to show respect and understanding towards those classmates that are in child domestic work. Here, something that we are pointing out in the report is that they should never expose one of their students as a child domestic worker, but they should take time after classes to talk about the reality of child labor in Nepal and teach students to show respect to children that may be in a situation of child labor. When it comes to children's rights organizations, they should develop advocacy campaigns to raise awareness among the parents of child domestic workers and the conditions that their children face in Kathmandu. As Ranjana was saying, many of these parents are not aware of the situations that their children would meet in Kathmandu. They don't have the tools, the knowledge to keep in touch with them, to be able to monitor their situation, and this also has several implications. Children's rights organizations should also launch awareness and empowerment programs in public schools that are attended by child domestic workers and assist child domestic workers to create mutual support groups at the school level. And finally, launch campaigns on attitudes and behavior change that target the employers and their families. So to encourage employers of child domestic workers to change their attitude and their behavior toward children. Many of the employers, from the conversations that we were able to have with some of them, are not mean person, they're not traffickers, but they don't have a clear understanding of the situation. So it is important to work with those employers to find points of contact and make sure that their behavior towards the children can change. And finally, we developed a few recommendations for funders. Child domestic work is one of those issues that is very much overlooked. And we are encouraging funders to support more studies into the reality of child domestic workers, support advocacy campaigns, and find direct projects that offer support to these children. At this point, we will conclude here with the presentation. I just want to remind all our attendees that you can find the full report and a child-friendly version of the report on our website, and my colleague Jaime also put the link in the chat of our Zoom. And I will now invite Ruth Kimani from Freedom Fund to share some thoughts with us, as Freedom Fund is also one of those organizations like Frida Slaves and CWISH Nepal that have done a lot of work on child domestic workers, a lot of great research. So we are asking Ruth, before we open the Q&A session, to share some of those reflections with us.
Yes, thank you so much, Martha, and also for that presentation. And it's really interesting to actually have a read through of what you found out from that research. And interesting to see that even while geographically we are different, the underlying drivers and realities are actually similar across. And I was just, taking note of the things that I felt that are similar that I could highlight based on the research that we've conducted. For those who are not familiar, I work with the Freedom Fund. I am based in Nairobi, Kenya. and I'm the head of programs for Africa. And we work in countries where, there is high prevalence of different forms of exploitation. And we use the hotspot approach where we concentrate our efforts on specific areas to create impact. And the conversation that we are having today on addressing exploitation of children in domestic work, we have our programs in Africa in 3 countries, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Nigeria. And what I'll be sharing, I will be borrowing some of the, what we are doing and some of the findings from the research that has been conducted in these areas. And where I'll not repeat most of the things as I said, is the findings from your research is quite similar on this context. So just even looking at basically on the push and pull factors, the primary drivers, poverty, and rural to urban migration, and also looking at it as child domestic work as a gendered issue. So where you find a significant majority of children in domestic work are actually girls. So both research from Ethiopia and Nigeria showed, a majority of children in domestic work are girls, and also as a problem on child domestic work being quite statistically invisible. Because, it's a hidden population, then making it difficult even to understand their working and living conditions. You'd find that even in Kenya, for instance, we do not have the latest data when it comes to the prevalence, even the nature of children in domestic work. Again, also looking at our mandate as a Freedom Fund, a mandate on a sole mandate being on addressing modern slavery. When you look at the nature of child domestic work, and this is always a question, I'm happy to see actually Jonathan in the team in this call, and also some of my colleagues in this country. So I'm happy that, even with the discussions that will come in later, would, they'll chip in just on providing some of that contextual issue. One of the questions that always bugs me, and always a question that comes over and over when we are having these conversations with different stakeholders and actors, is the question around what is so wrong about child domestic work. Because culturally, you'd find that in most homes and all, domestic work is seen as, you have to work, do the normal chores, work at home. But then again, it becomes exploitative or becomes hazardous, as most of the points that you have talked about. But it becomes a slavery issue when there is coercion or deception. And you have rightly put there, sometimes there is, promise of education or fair wages, of, a better life, either by a local broker or by an employer or even their own families, their parents, as you have put in there. There's also, it becomes a slavery issue because of the control and abuse. So as you have put again in the research that we found in Kathmandu, the issue of withholding wages, the restriction of movement, and also to some extent there are those who actually also experience physical, psychological abuse. Then it becomes a slavery issue. So it's no longer the normal, support for a child in terms of doing the normal chores at work. So, and then also it becomes a slavery issue because of also lack of legal protection. Because it's not recognized as a work. Because I know there's a question that has also come in our Q&A there, that when, at what point is it allowable legally? There are countries that have already put legal measures in terms of the age of work, but then it lacks a bit of some guidelines in terms of how that can be enforced. So there's lack of protection in our labor laws, leaving a gap when it comes to monitoring the kind of tracking when it's exploitative. So just looking at Ethiopia, just identifying key key data sets that would be interesting for us, and just to see the significance of the issue, is that 37% of the girls aged between 12 to 17 from that research found out that were engaged in domestic work. Again, as compared also to Kathmandu, you're talking about 5 to 13 years old. So this also shows the significance of the issue. In Ethiopia alone, having 37% of girls aged between 12 to 17. And also was able to find out that, exploitation is actually common, even as I'd mentioned earlier, about having a larger percent of the respondents being girls, and also facing conditions that are akin to modern slavery. So they indicate that 62% were in condition considered as one worst form of child labor, 62% of the respondents. And also looking at the working conditions, the research highlighted that the work in long hours and 55 hours per week, this giving 40% of the respondents actually working 55 hours per week. And just looking at one of the things that, and I will be pointing out towards where you could find the research itself and also some of the work that our partners are doing. One of the interventions that we have seen promising, and I will also link it to some of the recommendations that you've provided, is with the direct engagement, particularly on engaging communities, employers, and children of employers. And this looking at the multi-sector, multi-sectoral approach, where you're looking at different, you're not just looking at, let me engage with just this pocket of or cohort, but you're looking at different engagement of different stakeholders. And from this, we have actually seen, improvements of working conditions where employers are making adjustments, including enrolling to schools. And also good to see that it's a similar improvement that you're seeking in terms of enrollment of school. And also, one of the things that I've also seen as has come in the conversations on the chat is also exploring how the best ways of also engaging the teachers. So if there's enrollment of schools of children who have been rescued from domestic work, how best are they comfortable in the space in school? We also have, again, the behavioral change campaign, the NIGAT project, where we've utilized different forms of media, television, social media, community discussions to also, create that needed awareness, and looking at specific indicators, looking at reduced working hours and even access of education for children in domestic work. Again, that is a project that it is worth also checking, just to see how much, in terms of creation of awareness can change perceptions when it comes to child domestic work. Also looking at partnership with legal aid support. So looking at programs that are providing services through legal aid and also shelters or family reintegration. So looking at these different forms of support for protection and prevention that has also seen improvement of prosecution and convictions that have happened. Looking at Nigeria, again, we have programs in Nigeria and working with different partners there. And we also did an evaluation study. Again, I will also do a link of the same work in Nigeria. Again, similar to the conversations we've been having here on the nature of exploitation, which is also, akin to modern slavery. Also looking at the isolation and the lack of freedom for children in domestic work, and also looking at the economic exploitation where they receive no pay or little pay, and also the movement. Again, here in terms of the approach is also holistic. So it's looking at awareness campaigns, looking at community-based preventions, and looking at legal and policy reform, where all these interventions are happening and, leveraging on each other to be able to address the same. Again, in Kenya, we have a report on the hidden in plain sight, where we did our research before engaging into the program. Just looking at one of the things that I found interesting in the research from Kathmandu is also the pull factor, where you mentioned about children getting themselves into that employment. When we did also the study on perception, one of the things, particularly from the older children, 16 and above, there was peer pressure, so if there is an employer who is treating one right and, seen as a good source or an entry job for many, would actually come back to recruit their peers. So again, that is also something that, we saw as a pull factor. Mostly by the older children, but is different when it comes to younger children. The 7 might not have the agency to be able to make those decisions. Again, also here looking at similar push-pull factors on rural to urban. Again, here looking at the not so clear lines when it comes to care. So with that report in Kenya was looking at the cultural context where the lines between a caregiver and the employer are very not so clear. So especially when children are living with an extended family. So, when you have, particularly on kinship, it's kinship care where you have, if it's a relative, so that is seen as help. Because either you're coming from the rural areas with not so much support. And so when it comes to, it's very difficult, to account. So the exploitation in terms of you begin given food and boarding in this home, would you be compensated? That will be looked at as compensation. And so it's very difficult to actually, outline where exploitation comes in. And again, also looking at the lack of legal protection and enforcement, where you have the laws are present, protective laws are present, but when it comes to implementation, then becomes very difficult. So there is no government oversight when it comes to the informal nature of the work, and therefore makes it difficult. Again, also borrowing from the push that you're making as a request, a recommendation on the ratification of the convention. Indeed, this is also needed because I believe once that is ratified and is regularized, then enrolling children or recruiting children into domestic work will not happen. And again, also looking at the role of, community leaders or community structures when it comes to prevention and protection. So basically, I wanted to run through some of the things that I picked from the report, and also making similarities when it comes to our context and the programs that we are doing in these 3 countries. And I believe with the conversations that we'll be having after this would also build into that work and also the work, what you found out in Nepal. And I want to pause there. I know I called out my colleagues who are here, so I think with the conversation, we can all chip in. Yes, thank you so much, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ruth, for those reflections and inputs. Now we'll go to the Q&A section. So I see we have a list of questions here for Ranjana ji and Dr. Mata. But first, I would like to start with asking Dr. Mata. Dr. Mata, would the presentation be shared with all the participants here? I see there is a demand for that in the chat section.
So the recording of the webinar will be made available in Free the Slaves social media channels, and I believe that Jaime Warkulink, who is in charge of the event, can send an email with the recording to all participants.
Okay, thank you. So Here we go. The first question, I believe it's directed to Dr. Mata. Dr. Mata, would you like to address this question? What were the inclusion criteria for the child domestic workers? Is the report available?
Yes, thank you, Warren, for the question. So we wanted to engage both in the workshops and in the one-on-one interviews with the children that are either former child domestic workers or who are still currently working as domestic workers in Kathmandu. And we put in terms of age, and here I think that I'm answering also a question that is coming afterwards. We engaged only with children that at the moment of the interview or workshop activity were 12 or older. Not because it's not possible to conduct research, ethical research with children younger than 12, but because we felt that considering the topics that we were going to address in this research, the kind of conversation and activities that we were planning to have, we felt that 12 was a more appropriate minimum age for the children to be engaged. And of all the 30 children that we interacted with, some of them were identified and were referred to us by the psychosocial worker at CWISH, and they are children who are already engaged in weekly awareness and empowerment programs at CWISH, our partner in this research, and they are former child domestic workers. Other children were referred to us by the school principals in the case of those schools that, as we said before, collaborated in the research, and they pointed us to children that fell in the age category that we were looking at, and that the school principals felt were prepared to take part in this interview. And a few others were referred to us by a former child domestic worker who created a support group, peer support group in his school. I don't know, Ranjana, if you have something to add on this.
Yeah, no, that's the answer. Yeah, thank you, Martha.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Mata. I think it answered also the question of Iftikhar Mubarak. He was asking about what age of children is considered appropriate when engaging them in research process. I believe Dr. Mata has answered that. Ranjana ji, I believe the next question is addressed to you from Brian Werenkamp. How many of these children came from minority language groups? That is, their mother tongue is not Nepali.
Thank you, Kuldeep, and thank you, Brian, for that question. It's actually a qualitative research. We didn't go through that quantitative number, but just to answer you, it was like kind of 11 children were from the whose mother tongue is not Nepali, but among 30, 11 were like that. But many of them, their mother tongue is not Nepali, because Nepali is a common language in Nepal, because even in the school or all that they are educated in Nepali. But most of them, like 20 to 25 children, their mother tongue is not Nepali. So I can answer that clearly. But because the children that we have selected are already enrolled in school, and Nepali is a common language to all of us, so it was not difficult for us to do the interview or practice with them, like talk to them about asking the questions. Yeah.
Thank you, Ranjana ji. The next question is either Dr. Mata or Ranjana ji can take this question. How was the response from employers, especially in terms of allowing children to participate in the research?
I will answer that, because that's employers always been an interesting part for me to study in this whole child labor issues. Employers were quite reluctant and say like, oh, my children must have said something bad about me, that's why you call me. That was their initial reaction. They say like, they must have told something bad about me during the interview, that's why you have called me for this focus group discussion. And it really took us some time to convince them it's not about what they said or what they have told to us. It's about your perception and your thought process about keeping the child domestic workers. So as usual, like they are not very welcomed, but we have a channel through the principal and through our psychosocial counselor from the CWISH that we know like what was the reaction at home and all, and none of the children got any kind of questioning from their employer. So that was to be assured by us from our side. So it was not welcoming. Initially, they thought it like that, but after 2 or 3 hours sitting with them, they were kind of quite convinced like it's not what they have said and what we are going to ask them, not question answer to them, why you did this, why you did that. So yeah.
Okay, thank you, Ranjana ji. I believe the next question is also addressed to you. What is the legal framework around child domestic work in Nepal?
As I have mentioned before, also there are lots of government acts and policies that has been made. Like even the Constitution of Nepal 2015, it talks about the children protection, and also the Child Rights Act, and ILO Convention, Child Rights Convention. There are so many acts and convention that is already there in place, but it does not specifically talk about child domestic worker, because child domestic worker was not actually, in fact, included specifically as a hazardous work earlier also. Recently, only last year, I think a couple of months back only, Nepal government have included child domestic worker as in a list of that hazardous work. So hopefully it will go further. That's why we have put the recommendation to ratify that 189 convention of ILO. So it specifically doesn't talk about the child domestic worker, but it talks about the child protection and all that. So there are so many legal frameworks like constitutions and 2018 Child Protection Act and all that.
Okay, thank you, Ranjana ji, and thank you, Iftikhar Mubarak, for this question. Moving on to the next question is from Ime Samuel Itukudo. Has there been any pushback from the government, whose position is that child domestic work is a crime, of course, and should not be encouraged? So did we find any pushback from the government?
In terms of Nepal, like we have seen couple of wards and municipalities where government are actively working against the child domestic worker, and that like they also visit the door to door and see like is there any child domestic workers in that area or not. But as I have mentioned before also, like they are not taken, they are not mentioned as a child domestic worker. They are often referred as a nephew or niece of the house owner or landlady. So it's quite difficult for government also to come up with the ultimate solution of taking them out or sending them back to their home. But yeah, some of the municipalities and ward are working towards it quite actively, and some are like, as you know, in Nepal, the government changes quite often, and even the local level are changing, and people are not much aware, but they are adding up to the solutions day by day. And as I have also mentioned in one of the example before, like one of the ward, they went and sent the letter to all the household to come and participate in a program of child domestic worker, and most of them have ignored, saying like we don't have any child domestic worker at all. So that kind of also feedback the government is getting. But yeah, they are working towards it in the urban cities, especially in Kathmandu, Lalitpur, and Bhaktapur. But it will take quite some time for them to get there and almost abolish this child domestic worker issue.
Okay, Ranjana ji, thank you. Next question is from Iftikhar Mubarak. Were there any child domestic worker who shared any incident of abuse, physical or sexual?
So throughout the research, as we were saying when discussing the findings, a great number of children were reporting to us cases of verbal abuse in which they feel that the employer is addressing them in a very disrespectful way that is generating emotional and psychological scars in these children that are then going to have a long-term effect in their lives as adults. Some children also talked about physical abuse in the forms of occasional beatings if they do something wrong in the house, if a certain task is not done as the employer would like, let's say cooking a certain type of food or not cleaning well enough in the employer's perspective, they may be beaten, especially by the auntie, the female head of the household. In one case, one child throughout the interview exposed having been a victim of sexual abuse by on part of one of the family members, and that was a case that we treated very carefully in line with the ethical protocol that we developed for this research, making sure to refer the child to the psychosocial counselor that we had available throughout the entire research process, exactly to give support to those children that may be found being in need of care. And then and Ranjana ji can perhaps jump in and share some more about how that was handled. But there was a process of putting the child in a safe space and then reintegrating her in their family of origin.
Yes,
Okay.
that was quite an difficult, daunting task actually. Like when you do a research and like these kind of safeguarding issues arises, then it's quite an like we have to understand the situation of the child as well as their family, because sometimes the family don't even want to take back the children. They say like, no, no, they are doing good there. Why should we take them back? It's just because you are asking. And even the school sometimes, like where he or she is studying, they are not ready to bring such kind of cases forward. They say like it will come up to with the reputation of the school, so we should not bring such kind of issues. But in our case, as Martha mentioned, through our psychosocial counselor help, we kind of did 3 or 4 series of counseling with the children, and then again to the school, and then to the parents, not parents, relative of that children, her sister, and then send her back to her sister's home because she was more safe rather than at the place of her owner. So yeah, so that was quite an example for us to share here.
Okay, thank you, Ranjana ji, for adding that perspective. The next question is from Ime Samuel Itukudo. Did the research explore if the time children in domestic work spend in school reduce any form of abuse at their living place?
So I'm not sure if I'm understanding the question right, Ima. In case I'm going off track, please do let me know. But the time that children spend in school is certainly a positive time, and all the children that we spoke with are happy about the opportunity of going to school. As we saw, that was one of the main reason, if not the main reason, why they were looking at the opportunity of moving to Kathmandu, working in a family's house, as something positive because of the opportunity of hopefully getting a better education. So they are very happy about the time that they spend in school. It's time that they also spend away from the house, away from the employers. But again, as we saw, it's something that needs to be nuanced. At some point, they may need to get late to school or leave school earlier, and they're not able to engage in any extracurricular activities. So again, like even the time that they spend in school doesn't remove the fact that then they have to go immediately back home, and then there is where the reality of a child labor that they live on a day-to-day basis represents itself again.
Okay, Dr. Mata. So Ime has added if CDW feels less abuse at school as against how they feel when at home. I believe you have answered that.
Yeah, so like definitely, but also as we said during the presentation, not every teacher has the capacity, has the interest, has a sensitivity to try to truly offer support to these children. This is something that with this research we pointed out and that we are interested in working on. Now that the research has been published, we want to work on these findings, to collaborate more with the schools, with the teachers, to make sure that, because in the house the situation is so challenging, at least schools can truly become a place of support for child domestic workers.
Thank you, Dr. Mata. John Frame congratulates on this interesting and important study and comments that this has a methodological design. So his question is to clarify from Ranjana ji. Ranjana ji, did you say in the beginning that some children prefer their employers and don't feel love towards their natural parents anymore?
Definitely, that was the case of the lived experience that I have shared, because the goal was brought to the like at the owner's house when she was 7 or 8 years old, and she was already 16, 15, 16 by the time she was giving the interview, and she felt like her father kind of sold her in that household without like her mother's consent or her consent. So she didn't wanted to go back to the same father and say like, I want to live with you. She's like a more happy in this house, even though she was going through like she had to do all the household chores from early 4 o'clock in the till 12 o'clock at the night, but she felt like more loved in this house than what her father did to her. So that was the case of that one child like that she shared, but it might not be case with all the children that we did the interview with.
Okay, thank you so much, Ranjana ji. The next question is from attorney Ann Hussain. She comments for this well-researched presentation and would like to know of whether any statistics was collected on reports of beating, which is disciplining, and sexual abuse cases that are existing with child domestic labor.
No, we didn't collect these kind of statistics because, as Ranjana was saying before, this was a qualitative study, because we noticed that the few other research reports that were published quite a number of years ago, to be honest, on child domestic workers in Nepal had taken this quantitative approach. So we wanted with our research to do something different that was putting the voice of the children forward in terms of building a picture through their voices in a way that would show what their life as child domestic workers is. So we were less interested in the numbers and more interested in the full stories as retold by the children. In the case of sexual abuse, as we mentioned, of the 30 children that we engaged with, the instance of sexual abuse only emerged in one case, but we didn't collect data, so it may be that other children didn't feel comfortable in talking about it, so we cannot present this as a finding. It's just I can share it just as a consideration, but again, not a finding that we tested.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Mata, for that clarification. Before we move forward, there is a question in chat section from Bhaskar Karki ji. I would request all to put the questions only in Q&A section so that we can take a good track of all these questions. So I'll take this question before we move forward. Otherwise, I'll lose it because other comments are coming. So, Bhaskar Karki ji's question is to Ranjana ji, and his question is on the age of child workers. According to the Labour Act, child under 14 years should not be engaged in any form of work. Nepal says zero tolerance. But you said, Ranjana ji, that most of the children participating in the research started working from 5 to 13 year onwards. Therefore, how do you think ILO Convention 189 will address this problem? This is to you, Ranjana ji.
ILO convention, like it will give a platform of the decent work. What are the decent work that should be like? What are the like laws and regulations are already there, right? But we want something to bind and bring them. Like what are the decent domestic works, and why the children below 14 should not be working in that like as in child domestic workers. So it's a risky business that we have to understand, and it's a zero tolerance, we understand, but like no children should be engaged in any risky business or work like children should not be in that act. So the ILO 189 will definitely talk about this part of the risky business.
I think we lost Ranjana ji in between. We'll wait for her to come back. But let's move ahead with the next question. I think this question is directed to Ruth. Ruth, we request you to please answer it in brief. The question is from Gabriel Barasa, and the question is, how was the international policy or law on child labor, especially in Africa? Of course, Africa is a big continent with many countries, but over to you, Ruth, for a brief response to this.
Yeah, thank you. I believe maybe the question is with regards to how the international or regional laws on child labor are, affected when looking at the different countries. But as I said earlier, you'd find that we have this in place, but the issue has always been on the enforcement. And in certain countries in Africa, not ratifying some of this. So you'd look like if you look at the different ILO conventions, like the Convention 138 of the minimum age, which sets on the minimum age of employment at 15 years. And you'd find that, there are those that have domestic laws that align with this when it comes to minimum age. Also looking at the worst form of, child labor convention, that is 182, again, requiring different countries looking at the guidelines or, domesticate in such a way that is able to be enforced at the different countries. Or the UN Convention, then the rights of children, you have all these that, again, are included in constitutions of the different countries or, the Bill of Rights. So they are there, but when it comes to issues of enforcement, it was where now, together with civil society and actors, would be able to be following up to also hold government accountable. And this actually goes to even the earlier question, because you have to realize that this is a systemic issue. And so we might have all these policies and laws in place, but when it comes to what our role is in terms of holding our governments accountable, is where now more action is needed. So yeah, short and answer. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Ruth. So Gavin Lewis from Guyana, thanks Dr. Mata and Ranjana for the presentation, and says that child begging is common form of child labor in Guyana. And his question is, how can we differentiate between child begging out of necessity and one who's being exploited? This question is to, I believe, Dr. Mata.
Yes, thank you, Kevin. So we didn't focus on child begging in this research, and we didn't find an intersection between child domestic work and child begging, at least in the context of Nepal. What perhaps connects a bit more with your question is the element of necessity. So what we did find is that, of course, many children, if not most children, enter child domestic work out of necessity, either because of the poverty of their family, because of domestic violence, multiple marriages, or because of the lack of education. But the point is not the reason why they enter. The point is the fact that once they become child domestic workers, they are not treated in a respectful, dignified way. They are exploited, they are verbally abused, and this creates a situation of concern that we must work together to address. So the element of necessity doesn't detract to the fact that we are facing a situation of very concerning exploitation that requires our concerted attention.
Thank you, Dr. Mata. And the last question we have is from Gefu Diop. And the question is, if these children are integrated into a movement, for example, like the African movement of working children and youth in Africa, which defends child labor, and if so, if it is present there, then how this movement collaborates with organizations like the ILO that fight against child labor.
Unfortunately, Ranjana ji is no longer with us
Yeah.
because she had the internet issues in the place where she lives. I'm not familiar, to be honest, with the African movement of working children and youth, but thank you for Gafo for pointing that out. I will definitely want to look into that. To the best of my knowledge, there isn't such a formalized network comparable to this in Nepal. What we would like together with CWISH and Free the Slaves in our efforts in taking steps that build on this research is to encourage the formation of peer support groups of child domestic workers within the schools, where these children can get together, find a safe space of supporting each other and being of help to each other in situations of special concern, and collaborate with the children's rights organizations.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Mata. I see Ranjana ji is back. Ranjana ji, you were answering the question from Bhaskar Karki ji when we lost you because of the electricity and connection related. Would you like to continue? I believe you were almost wrapping up your answer. That was about ILO Convention 189.
Yes. Sorry about that. Nepal is acting very weird with the internet and electricity. Yeah, so what I was trying to say is definitely like ILO convention will not fully, it cannot address the problem, but it can definitely help reduce kind of prevalence of child domestic worker in specific ways, because it talks about the decent work opportunities for the children, and it can collaborate with the other ILO's standard collectively, so that we can align that. If we can align that with current acts and regulation, then we can, like 138 ILO AIDS convention and then ILO 189, which will talk about the decent work. So collectively that can address that issue, but alone it definitely cannot will not be sufficient to address and solve the major issues of the child domestic worker. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Ranjana ji, for addressing that question. The previous question, which Dr. Mata was addressing, our colleague from CWISH Nepal, Ms. Ruja Pokhrel, wanted to add to that to her knowledge, and of course she has extensive knowledge of working in Nepal, the child workers are not engaged in the movement of which a similar example was given in African context. So Nepal does not have that kind of organization fighting for child labor. That is what Ruja ji's input is. I see there are no other questions. If there are any more questions, I believe you can reach out to the organizers and we'll try our best to answer those questions. But we would like to thank you to all our speakers and to all of you who joined this important conversations today. We have heard powerful insights into the lives of child domestic workers and the urgent need to protect their rights and dignity. On behalf of Free the Slaves and CWISH Nepal, we appreciate your engagement and commitment today. While our time is short, let's carry this conversation forward in our research programs and advocacy wherever we are in the world. And with that, we officially conclude today's session. Thank you.